Sweet surrender as I love, serve, and remember.
So as I was looking around, I thought this was I have my own sense of home, and so as I was looking around, I always, whatever the topic is, as you all know, I Google it. And I was fascinated by how many different angles people came at home. Like they weren't all the same. There's a lot here to home, and so we're going to have a very rich and full month. You can't do it all in one Sunday. So this is our survey Sunday, but there's a lot to home, and it's beautiful. And I think I'm going to begin with the end. Sometimes I build up to what I really think home is, but I'm going to start there because Stephen Covey says begin with the end in mind. So I'm going to start there, which is home is, for me, the way I would describe home is prayer. So last month we were talking about prayer and that there's this ever-presence that is always here, that is always loving, it never leaves, it never goes away. And notice I didn't say meditation. I said prayer, and the reason why I said prayer is because often in meditation you need a certain environment, or you need to get quiet. It's really hard to go into meditation when you're really agitated and there's just coursing energy, or really excited. Those are not times you think of as stopping and meditating. You might do witnessing meditation where you witness it, but even that, you're sort of distancing yourself from the experience by witnessing it. Where prayer, you can be right in the middle of whatever's going on. If you actually are looking at an actual roller coaster, whether you're at the peak of the mountain or the hill, or at the bottom, the fear, the ecstasy, wherever you are, you can pray. And the moment we pray, it activates the awareness of this ever-presence. And we know that we're home. So prayer, when we pray, we're home. Because we've just activated our conscious awareness of the presence right wherever we are, in whatever situation, whatever circumstance. So if you say thank you, that's a prayer. You've just acknowledged something greater than yourself. Thank you. But prayer comes in all sorts of forms. So like last month we went through the 5 steps and sort of a very full and rich idea of prayer, but a prayer can be as simple as thank you, or it could be as simple as help. There's Reverend Deborah Johnson came and spoke at Agape, which is a spiritual center down in Los Angeles. And this was 25 years ago, but I've never forgotten it. I was sharing it with Foundations class this past week. She was talking about safety, and she said, when you're swimming and you have the buoys, I don't know if they have them anymore, it's been so long, but out in the lakes they used to have buoys, and they say, don't go out beyond the buoys. And she said, the safest place you can be is out beyond the buoys. Because that's where you have to depend on spirit. And there's nothing more dependable than spirit. And that just, for some reason, that whole imagery got me. I loved it. Didn't want to test it, but I liked it. And then just this morning, I'm like, oh, that was the story Reverend Michael, and so many of you heard, or a few of you heard, Reverend Michael Beckwith is the minister at Agape, and several years ago he came to Santa Rosa. And a group of us here took we had a field day, and we went up to Luther Burbank's garden, and then we went to hear him speak. And he tells a story, and I don't remember all the context of the story, but what I remember is, so Michael Beckwith has been, for those of you who don't know, a minister for decades, has this extraordinary spiritual consciousness that you just feel being in his presence. And so he does witnessing meditation, he does prayer the way we were talking about last month, the full rich prayer. So he has this, and he's been doing it for decades, so he's out swimming, and suddenly the tide is pulling him out. And there's nobody around, nobody can hear him. And he realizes he does not have the strength to get back to shore. So he only had one availability. Help! He's asking spirit. After this lifetime of praying, he knows there's something there that will help him. Help! That was his only prayer. Help! Help! And then suddenly this big wave comes and pushes him to shore. Prayer activates this awareness that no matter where we are, even in the scariest situations where we don't have anyone to rely on, no person, no structure, nothing to rely on, there is something that is there that has us. that cares for us, that takes care of us all of the time. So prayer, for me, is ultimately all of our home when we choose to activate it. So I want to look at now home from from 4 different perspectives. And I love what people were sharing, because you sort of, different people picked off different aspects. It's 3 or 4, I don't know. It was, so home, and all of this is to stay in wonder. These aren't answers, these are inquiries. I hope you write them down. Home is a place. So when you think of home, it's like you come home after a hard day at work and you can kick off your shoes and you know, it's like, just let go. You don't have to put any, just surrender in home, because you know you're safe. Some said safe. You're accepted at home. It's a physical place. For some people, they've changed it from homeless to houseless, because they recognize there can be people that don't have a physical space but still have home within them. But in this particular case, I'm talking about a structure that cultivates a sense of home. Pico Iyer writers talks about it's a place that nurtures becoming. Aristotle says that place is a place that nurses becoming. Places that nurse our place of becoming. That it's a space, because we feel safe, because we can be ourselves, it's also where we can become more authentically ourselves. So in many ways, what I was seeing with all this, there's a lot of imagery, and they said that even if it's not a structure, if you go outside and you feel the morning sunrise in that space, you feel so safe and warm and cared for. It's a place of becoming. It's a place of nursing your becoming. I love that word, nursing. And the reason why Aristotle used nursing is because so much of it was connected to feminine pronouns. That place had a feminine essence, this womb of creation. It's a space. Our womb is a space where the becoming begins. And then as we birth out into the world, we find other spaces and places that nurse and nurture our becoming. So the question to ask yourself this month, to be in wonder, is what are those places? It's rarely singular. What are those places that nurse my becoming? Because I feel so safe, because I feel so protected, because I feel so accepted just as I am, I can start becoming more and more who I am. We can't really become who we are if we are defensive and have our walls up. We are not going to grow into our becoming, because we're too busy defending and protecting ourselves, and that takes a lot of energy. It's only when those walls start to fall that our true self can emerge. Also, I want to say with all of this is eternally becoming. Like, nothing ever stops. Home is not a final, everything is growing. So as I'm going through these 4 things, it's not like you find it and you're done. And I listened to a young man, he was paralyzed when he was early 20s, and he was talking about ableism. And I realized I'm guilty of it. He was very gentle about it, but it was very educational, how we just talk in sort of an ableist culture. And because he goes, I don't feel disabled, even though I'm paralyzed, I don't feel disabled, and I wish people would stop referring to me as disabled. And it was just a beautiful, he wasn't attacking, but he said something that I think is interesting for all of us. He said, the things that really get to me are inspiration porn. Like, what's that? And he said, this inspiration, like, do this and your life is changed forever. And it's sort of like this inspiration porn, like if you do this, you are done. You will be complete. You will transform and you are done. And he said, that never happens. We are constantly growing. Wouldn't it be boring if we stopped growing? So I just thought that was an interesting term. So I'm just doing that as sort of a caveat to everything that's said. It's not like a final resting. So I'm talking about place. I'm not talking about one place or a static place that is only in this place. But what are places that have nurtured your becoming, and not just in your past, but today, in the present sense? What are the places and spaces besides Jerry's house? We all know Jerry's house that nurture your becoming, besides maybe obvious things, but does your house, do you feel safe in your home? This is why there's so much to say about home, because obviously there's a lot of people who have very difficult challenges, have had in their past and may now have challenges in your home, and it doesn't feel safe, and it doesn't feel like it's a place where you're nurtured. So if that's the true, what are the places where you can feel safe to nurture your becoming? Maybe in a friend's home, or a therapist's home, or a doctor, or a spiritual community, a home group, a class, some place that you can nurture your becoming where you feel safe. So what are the place and spaces where you feel home? In the past, it's wonderful to look at the past, and in the present. But there's some people who don't feel really strongly identified with a place or a space. And that was actually fairly interesting. As I was looking at listening to all these various talks on home, there were many of people who felt like they never really connected to any home, physical place, and so they felt displaced. They didn't feel a sense of a home. So home was an identity, and if home was a place, they didn't know what their identity was. And so a lot of these talks that I started listening to were people who looked differently or came from a family that was different than the surrounding area. So one of the gentlemen that I was listening to, his name was Philip Ka, and he was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and as were all his friends. But he didn't look like he was from Toronto, Canada. He looks Asian, and so he said always people are asking, no, but where are you really from? Like, you're not here, and then it's like then they would try to guess the Asian country, and it's like hello. So he's Korean, South Korean, and so he said, and it was true. He said I started as the more people were reflecting that back to me. He said I didn't look like any of my friends, and I didn't feel like there's always like this feeling that something was missing. I never felt at home. And so he started traveling first with friends, and he said we did all the normal things, museums and looking at the history, and he went to Korea, and it's like I wasn't getting the answers. There was still this missing thing. So they went home, and I just kept traveling, and for the next 10 years, he just continued traveling, and he picked different things. He said, well, now I want to get to know the people. Museums, I'm done with museums, so I'm going to go to, he's a young gentleman, I'm going to go to festivals. It's a way to get to know people. So he started talking about all these festivals he went to all over the world, and all the crazy experiences, and then he said people go after their dreams, and so I started running marathons in different countries and doing martial arts in 12 different countries. Like, he just kept trying to find ways to connect, and he's going around. He said, well, maybe this is all too bright. I'm going to look at the dark side. And so I went to Haiti after they had their tsunami, and after New Orleans, after Katrina, and he said, I lost all my money, I was poor, he said I was literally begging on the street, I had no home, I was struggling, there's health issues, I went into debt, I went into that, like, so he said, I just kept exploring, because there was this hunger. Where do I belong? Where is my home? And ultimately he kept saying, where's my identity? And so finally when he arrived, he decided he came home after the 10 years and was really reflecting on all of these experiences that he had. And he recognized, he said, my identity, he said, I actually started to feel a really strong sense of who I was. That through all these experiences, this I of me, this self that was making all these choices and having all these experiences, that was becoming my home. That was becoming my identity. And what I recognized is all the people that had contributed to this journey of 10 years in all the different countries, they were all part of my identity. Like, I had incorporated them. They were all my home. It wasn't like one place was my home. Everybody was my home. Everyone was part of my identity. Isn't that beautiful? And the more I integrated all of these experiences and felt my identity, he said, I did go back to medical school like my parents wanted, but now I knew it was what I wanted because I knew who I was. Home was knowing who I am. Identity. So this is also a place I'm inviting you this month to be in wonder. First place, and now identity. What identity do you feel feels like home for you? Do you have a sense of your own identity that feels like home? Like when you come to home to that identity, you feel at home. You are safe with yourself. sometimes we talk about safety out there. Are you safe with yourself? Do you accept yourself? Home is where you're accepted so you can let go. Do you accept yourself? Are you safe in your own mind? Are you safe in your own choices? Home. Are you at home in who you are? Or are you restless? Are you at war with yourself? That's actually something I've had to work through a lot. I'm very comfortable at being at war with myself. A little bit too much. I'm like, I don't like sometimes I don't want to be at war with myself because it doesn't feel peaceful. So I have to then I go, okay, so how can I bring harmony to this little battle I've been having? Are you comfortable with battles inside of you, or is your place peace? And you just don't battle with yourself. You just are in this wonderful, peaceful, harmonious, beautiful, graceful place all the time. Again, it's an ongoing journey. There's no one right answer. We're not comparing ourselves. It's just looking. Home as a place, home as an identity, and then, of course, home as belonging. I think we all recognize that when we feel at home, we belong. You don't feel like a foreigner. You can't come home and kick off your shoes and let go if you don't feel like you belong. You're going to keep just sort of like make sure you're sitting, being proper and polite and doing the, kind and generous, but you're externally focused because you're in a new environment and you don't want to, well, hopefully, be disrespectful to the environment. But when you're home and you're with people that accept you just as who you are, you can let go. So belonging it's so you can let go, you can be safe, and as some people were sharing earlier about home, it's this incredible intimacy. When we belong, we feel such a natural affinity and intimacy with whoever we're around. Again, it goes back to the safety, that you're loved and accepted, and that you love them and accept them. So there was another young man, I think his name was Vamba Sharif. That's why I have my notes, because I'm looking at the names, like, remember their name. Vamba Sharif, I believe his name. He's from Liberia, beautiful man. He said he grew up, he said, in my home, I had 100 people in my family. It was vast. He said, my aunts and uncles were as much my parents as my parents were. Everybody took care of each other. It was lovely. I felt loved. I felt appreciated. I loved my home. So I said, but I wanted to go exploring. That's also going to be part of a home as we go in the month exploration. And so he went to Kuwait, and he said, what would it take for me to feel like I belong in Kuwait? And so he started putting on the clothes that people wear in Kuwait and learn their language. He goes, I need to learn their language. I need to be able to connect with them. And he didn't give the result to that. He just said, I was just working on how can I feel like I belong here? And then something drew him to Syria, and then he did the same thing for Syria. And for that, he said it was really important to learn their history to feel like to belong. And so he did what he thought took to feel like it belonged in Syria, and he spent time there. And then both of those are a little bit restrictive on what you can read. So he went to the Netherlands, and he said, then I felt like I could read anything in the Netherlands, and that's my love. So I got to experience that part, and how to fit in with the Netherlands is reading a lot of books. And he said, but in all these places, I still, I had this whole idealized version of my home. So I was always kind of missing my home. Home was a place. It was in Liberia. And all these places were nice, and he was having wonderful experiences, but they weren't home. So he went back home to Liberia. And he said, I realized I idealized it. There were challenges there as well. Beautiful people, but still challenged. It was an idealization. And then he said, well, what is it? What is it to feel belonging? And he said, my favorite thing. He said, I realized belonging is a choice. And every time I chose to belong, I belonged. And he said, the question is not do you belong to them, but when you meet someone, do you belong to me? Isn't that great? I just loved that. That rather than waiting to see if you belong to the people, wherever you are, and they're going to accept you into their group, or they're going to invite you into their world, are you going to invite them into your world? Are you going to say, you belong to me? That's a wonderful challenge for us in a community that says there's only one power and one presence, and everyone is a beautiful, unique emanation of pure spirit. That, therefore, we know in the absolute sense, everyone belongs to us. So do we live in a way that says, do you belong to me? He said, do people feel like they belong when they're around you? Belonging. How does home look like it's belonging for you? How has it looked in the past, and how does it look now? Is there any area of belonging that you want to grow into? So I'm going to share a little bit about my own sense of belonging on the spiritual journey, because it's been a little bit of a challenge for me in the belonging area. I love spirit. I love our principles. Feel them, experience them, have had many different meditation practices of expansion of the infinite presence. And I love them all, and I'm grateful for them all. And I know that what we teach is true because I've experienced it over and over and over. But what was always nagging at me is I still didn't feel this intimacy. I think you said intimacy, and I wasn't feeling this. I felt the vastness. I felt the freedom. I felt the joy. I felt the light, and it concerned me that wasn't enough. Like, I got high expectations. But no, it's not that. It was just I loved all of that. But I was still looking for intimacy. And so in the 90s, I made a choice. And I had a whole conversation with the infinite impersonal about this, because I didn't have a way of understanding it at the time. But I just said, okay, I know that that's what's real. I know the ultimate is beyond all concept, beyond all images. It includes everything, is beyond everything. I get that. I'm with you, God, divine presence. But I need some intimacy, so I need a form. And the form that I feel the safest with and the closest with is Jesus. And then I imagined, I never pretended it was true. I imagined Jesus sitting across, and I didn't care. I wasn't really strict about the imagery. It was just light, like a man with a beard and light, just light. And I'm going to talk to this infinite, eternal presence through this singular form called Jesus, because that's when my heart really starts to open up. That's when I really start sharing things that I can't. No matter how much light there is, it still feels distant. This felt intimate. I have him sitting at a chair. For people who used to know me, I used to journal to Jesus at Starbucks, and when people come and say, is this chair taken? It's absolutely taken. Don't you be taking my chair. But it was so intimate. It was that intimacy that I was craving. But the problem is, which I 100% understand, is that there's been so much destruction and awful things happen in the name of Jesus. And it feels like it's almost getting worse. There's so much separation. So there's the Jesus religion, which is Christian, which is versus Buddha, which is versus Hindu, which is versus indigenous tribes, what Christians did to, pagans. It's just constant violence and pain. Not constant. There's a lot of it. There's a lot of hurt that has been done in this name of Jesus. So I noticed, and still, even as I say it here, there's a little bit of a constriction when I say that name, because there's the public saying of the name and there's the intimate experience of it. So I have my intimate experience of it, but when I say it publicly, I'm like, I don't mean that. That's not the one I mean. I feel like I have to give a million disclaimers for a good reason, for a very good reason. So it's been interesting as a minister that place, that vortex where I feel so much healing, so much transformation has happened, so much extraordinary miracles in this relationship I don't feel like I can talk about because of all the external religion around Christianity. But I just, in the last 2 months, found a way that for me, I can describe my relationship with Jesus in a way that feels understandable in the spiritual progressive world. So I feel very happy about it. And that is, because I remember I asked this before, most hands up. Most of you know about the story of the Bhagavad Gita. How many of you have read the Bhagavad Gita? So about half of you have read about that. So the Bhagavad Gita is a short chapter in this huge Hindu myth called the Mahabharata. And the Bhagavad Gita is called the Song of God. And this is where Arjuna, who is a warrior who's fighting in a war like we have in the human realm, and he's done fighting. He doesn't want to hurt anybody anymore. He's fighting his family. It's like a civil war like we've had here in this country. And Krishna says, who is his charioteer in the war, he says, no, you have to fight. You have to participate. Basically, you have to participate in this world. This world is hard. It is dualistic, and you have to participate. And so the whole Gita, I highly recommend it, especially Eknath Easwaran's interpretation, which is very easy to understand. He's describing the God, different paths to God. He's just sort of being a spiritual teacher for Arjuna. And then finally, by chapter 11, he goes, okay, do you want to have a direct experience of God? Do you want to, we've just been talking and talking about God. Let's have the direct experience. And so in chapter 11, the form disappears and he becomes everything. He becomes the infinite, all things that have ever existed, all form in this realm and other realms. It's like insane. Like Yogananda says, we don't have an experience of God because we would shatter. It's so huge. The energy in it's so big. And so Arjuna is having this experience and he's like, enough. Go back to the individual form, please. I can handle that. That's just way too much. And I'm like, that's my relationship with Jesus. That Jesus is not Jesus versus anything else. Jesus is a form that includes the infinite nature of all life. It includes every religion, every Hinduism, Buddhism, pagan, Australian Aborigines, Native Americans, African indigenous. It includes Muslims and Jewish people, seculars, atheists. It includes everything. Science, everything. There's nothing that is outside. So when I'm talking to Jesus, I am talking to the infinite. I am not talking the head of a religion that has been cruel and very human and very specific and limited and feels claustrophobic. And so why that's important, why I'm bringing this all up now, is because for me, that is my home. My home is the infinite, where there's no limitation, where there is no wall, where there's no separation, where there's nothing else happening but pure spirit, embodied by an intimate form where I can also feel the intimacy and the compassion and the divine wisdom on a very specific and intimate and personal level that I have a hard time connecting with when it's so vast. Like Arjuna has a hard time with the infinite, but I can handle the infinite through a physical form. And that has been so important to me because that's how I find spiritual home. My spiritual home, and I know you all relate this on your own ways, is infinite and personal. Home. What is your spiritual home? Where do you feel that you belong spiritually, where you feel completely safe, where it feels intimate, where you know you are completely accepted? And where there's also a little bit of push. That presence, my presence with Jesus is healing, but it's also pretty assertive in pushing me beyond my comfort zone. And we're going to get to that about home too. Home is, if it's about your becoming, you're not going to just stay the same. Home isn't just about being a couch potato and never changing. So what is that spiritual home for you? All right, so does this look beautiful and rich? Are you up for it? Are you for this exploration? Home? What is place? What does home look like as a place in your life right now? A place or a space? Home as an identity? What does that look like in your life now? And is there any growth you want to do in that area? What is home as a state of belonging? What does that look like for you now? And how much are you want to grow in home as a belonging? And what is home as a spiritual state of consciousness? What does that look like for you now? And how do you want to grow in that? These are what we're going to wonder about all month long. Be in the everyday wonder. I'm so glad we do this together. Thank you all for sharing your home, your ideas of home, and that we continue to grow in this beautiful intimacy, in this beautiful safety, in this beautiful belonging, in this beautiful welcoming, because there is definitely that welcoming energy of home. I guess that's my last point. The other thing about home, when I was saying the journey never ends, and yet this feeling of coming home, it's constant. It's like, oh, I'm home again. I went away, I'm home again. It can happen throughout the day. And then suddenly, I'm home again. Thank you for welcoming home. It's like a returning. We're returning to it over and over and over. Whether it's we've been away just for a little bit in the daytime, or it's been away for months, I've been away from home, or years. Home. Home. It's where we began in that beautiful cosmic womb and then in the human womb. So we're going to be moving into prayer now and just calling forth this consciousness of home. The home that's before time. A spiritual home that existed before we were ever in a human body. Where was our home before we were birthed, before we were conceived? Where was our home? Expand, 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 expand beyond concepts. Where was my home before I was even conceived in a human body? And then we feel into the beautiful home of a womb that every single human being and animal, that womb of creation, that place that fed us, that took care of our physical needs, so we continue to grow for those 9 months of our becoming. And then we're birthed into form. And everything we ever experienced as a child, those things that are hard and those things that are good, and yet spiritually there was always this place that was home, that was maybe just out of sight, maybe invisible to us, but it's always been there. And then for many of us, you could see it, you could feel it home. It's usually very nuanced, it's not one or the other. So be with all these experiences of home. It's so deep because it's before our rational thinking even was developed. It's pure emotion, home. It goes into the deepest root chakras of our being, into the most tenderest and gentlest part of our soul, before we might have learned to be aggressive or assertive or state our thoughts. There was just this gentle nurturing and nursing of our tender soul. And then we continue to grow and to grow and to grow in, through, and as this home. Sometimes we want to leave the home immediately. Sometimes we want to stay the home all the time. Home. Until we are right here in this moment in time and place, right here, whether it's online or in this beautiful lighthouse space. Home. We call forth this consciousness of the spiritual home that is right here and right now, enveloping each of us, loving and tenderly caressing each of us just as we are right now, no matter what's going on with our thoughts, with whatever happened before we got here today, the good, the bad, wherever we are on this spectrum. Home. We're home, we're loved, we're cared for, we're celebrated with, we're cried for. We're cared for at the deepest level. We're supported. We're celebrated. All of it home. Home, we're always in it. When we know the divine, we know we are always home. And so today we just bask in our homeness, not just as individuals, but as this collective energy in this room right here and right now. We are at home together. We are at home in this space and in this consciousness together, in this space and in this place. And what a miracle that we have people online in their homes in different parts of the country. Home. We are at all home together. And as we know this about this consciousness in this room, we claim and accept all the healing that is needed. From this tender and infinite intelligence, we accept that there is something that is being activated, this wonderful home that is responding to each and every one of us very personally and very intimately, giving and receiving all that we need right here and right now. Whether we are looking for a physical healing, an emotional healing, or a mental healing, a healing in our relationships, a healing in our finances, a healing in our work life, in all of it or none of it, it is responding here and now. As we go forth into the elections that are happening this week, we feel the pain body of this country. We feel the pain body of this country. And yet, even in the midst of this pain body, this home is big enough to hold all of us, to hold all of the pain, and it is so powerful that it is possible to even heal. And so we call forth that consciousness of a healing that we can't do on our own. And so we allow ourselves to be in any time in the next week where it feels overwhelming, where the news and the separation feels overwhelming. We allow ourselves that wonderful, beautiful, simple prayer, help. Help. This country and this world, we need this divine home, this loving energy, help. And when we know that we have prayed and we have asked, it has been received and it is being answered in ways that we can't even imagine. And we go forth in thank you, in gratitude, in trust, in faith, that all of our prayers in our home are being answered in ways that we can't even imagine, for greater love, for greater healing, for greater unity, for greater harmony, for greater beauty, for greater love, for greater kindness, for greater generosity, for greater abundance for all people everywhere, for all beings, for this beautiful planet Earth and all of its inhabitants, the animals and the plants and the minerals, the air, the earth, for all of it. When we ask, it is given. Prayer is our home, and this is our prayer today. Help wherever we need help, and thank you. Thank you. Thank you. In deep abiding love and everlasting peace, we let this word be now, as we say together, and so it is.
I walk in God in all I do. I walk in God in all that